Good evening, everyone. Jay Saki here, coming in with a movie review. So I was walking the streets of Pittsburgh the other day, and some nice girl complimented my sunglasses and told me I looked like I was from the movie The Outsiders. I've never seen The Outsiders, and hearing that I looked like I belonged in this film made me want to give it a watch. So I watched it. So what's it about? Well, it's a 1983 movie directed by Francis Ford Coppola and based on the novel of the same name, a 1967 novel by a certain S.E. Hinton, who I am not overly familiar with. So what's the film about? It takes place, I guess, in 1967 and is about a gang of greasers. I thought greasers were out with the 50s, but I guess they hung around for longer than I realized. These guys are basically the guys from West Side Story, except with much less class, and they don't have the Puerto Rican gang to fight. Just white kids looking to fight other white kids. And basically, two of the characters, one of them played by Ralph Macchio from Karate Kid fame, are involved in a fight where one of them kills someone from a rival gang with a knife. So these two young punks have to go into hiding while the heat blows over. And then there's hijinks. And obviously someone at some point has to deviate from gang life. In West Side Story, two people find love as a deviation from the gang violence. In this movie, it's going to be something else. And the lesson is going to be gang life is bad. So first of all, I don't think I looked like any of the characters from this movie since I was wearing my flat cap that day, and no one in the movie ever wears sunglasses, at least not to my memory. I mean, I'm sure someone had to have worn sunglasses at some point, but I don't recall anyone generally wearing sunglasses in the film. I guess I must have been given off a certain vibe that day. Maybe it was the leather jacket. So for starters, this movie stars a lot. It's one of those ensemble cast films, with a group of people who were probably not famous yet. I mentioned it's got Ralph Macchio. Then it also has Patrick Swayze, Rob Lowe, Emilio Estevez from Mighty Ducks fame, and Tom Cruise. So yeah, this movie is about troubled youth getting into trouble and getting into fights and growing up in rough environments. When I was young, I grew up in a pretty safe environment, so movies about troubled young teenagers didn't really appeal to me. I always thought it always seemed really uncomfortable watching movies like that. It made me think, wow, I'm glad I didn't, grow up like that. I always felt very detached from the subject matter. I remember as a young kid, my sisters would watch the movie Newsies a lot, and in Newsies, just seeing those kids get into trouble made me feel uncomfortable. It got my anxiety up, if you will. Everyone in that movie seemed like such an awful person. Yeah, pretty much any movie I think that was all about the rebelliousness of youth never really appealed to me because I did not grow up rebellious. I grew up in a well-adjusted home. At least, I don't think I was rebellious. And of course, a movie like this, it has to have a moral about, try to be square, it's the gang life isn't good. And such kinds of morals always felt extremely weak to me. It's a bit like when Martin Scorsese makes a gangster movie, and it's all about how crime doesn't pay, or the gangster life only ends in death. I'm left thinking, oh my goodness, this movie must speak so strongly to the gangsters and organized crime in the audience, who will watch it and say, oh my goodness, I did not realize I was living a terrible life. Thank you, movie, for pointing out the error of my ways. I will be a good person now. Save me, Hollywood, with your higher morality. I fear movies like this exist so people like myself can say, at least I'm not as horrible as that. Even movies like The Karate Kid, which is about a kid who gets severely bullied and gets into fights, did not, exactly. I like that movie, but it didn't have the strongest. There was always a disconnect for me with that movie and other such films. So are you saying, Jay Saki, this movie had nothing to offer you? Well, actually, it had quite a bit to offer me in spite of what I just said. Because even though I did not grow up with, in a rough, bad environment like the characters in this movie, the older I got, the more I ran into and made friends with and met people who absolutely did grow up in those kinds of environments. Maybe it wasn't necessarily they were in a greaser gang, but, they grew up in a bad neighborhood, or they literally had to get into a fist fight going to and from school every day, and that was their reality. So I gained some perspective from meeting and listening and talking with those people. And, so when I watch this movie, The Outsiders, it actually does give me some insight into the kinds of lives certain people have had to lead. Pain and suffering that I will never really know or understand, but does in fact exist. So I did have to watch this film, and I had it on my mind that yes, this is, educational in that regards. It's teaching me things about people. So this movie has like a 70% Rotten Tomatoes score, and I kind of saw why. It did feel a bit niche, like, even though it's insightful and educational, I think it appeals to this type of story appeals to a smaller type of specific audience. But I honestly think if this film came out today, it would be a contender for Best Picture. It would be that like 100% perfect critic score, and to be nominated for a bunch of awards, and then everyone sees it and everyone says, yeah, it was good, but then, just like all award-winning films, everybody quickly forgets about them. Just like The King's Speech, nobody cares about that movie anymore. Or, virtually every other Best Picture winner that has ever won Best Picture. This movie was definitely made in a time where you could tell the filmmakers were way less self-conscious about their filmmaking, because your main protagonists in the movie are a bunch of bad people some of who really treat the women around them like complete garbage. Like there's a whole scene where a bunch of these characters are at like a movie theater, and they're teasing the girls like, hey, would you want to get with me and stuff like that, and the girls have to be smart and be like, hey punk, why don't you beat it and stuff. And, normally that type of character would only exist for 1 minute to be, smacked out of the movie, but those same characters carry on. These are the characters you're following throughout this story, as awful and sinful and terrible as they are. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm saying observationally, this is just one of those films that teaches you a lot about human nature and what you could do in the early 80s with filmmaking. I think today you wouldn't even be allowed to humanize these characters on any kind of level. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I'm getting way too far ahead of myself. I wanted to talk about one of the most hilarious moments in this film. So basically, the main plot driver is two of the characters are in a knife fight, they kill someone, and they have to run away and hide for a while. And someone tells them, hey, go hide in this old church in the woods someplace, just hide there for a few days. And so they go there, and they're just waiting there for days on end. And one of the characters is narrating the story, and he says, those were some of the longest days of my life, just waiting. Then at some point it hard cuts to one of these young guys reading Gone with the Wind, and I just started howling with laughter. It's like young gang kids in hiding, so bored, just waiting, to see what happens. So one of them, with all their time, just reads Gone with the Wind. And that made me laugh. Maybe you guys don't get the humor, but the idea that someone's so bored that they end up taking up reading Gone with the Wind, it's just humorous to me. Not that I know if Gone with the Wind is a boring book, but obviously you have to be really bored to try older literature like that. I actually don't remember much Tom Cruise in this movie. Granted, a whole lot of these actors were really young, so it's always hard to recognize. It can sometimes be hard to recognize younger versions of actors. But Tom Cruise was in the movie, I think, only for a very short while. But yeah, I had a moment oh hey, look, it's young Tom Cruise. How about that? So are you ever going to revisit this movie again, Jay Saki? Probably not. It was definitely intriguing and enjoyable, though. I mean, it held my interest. It held my interest. But when it was done, just like the best picture films that you see and that you don't have to revisit. So what did I learn today? I guess I learned a whole bunch of actors acted alongside each other in this movie. I got to say, hey, there's a young Tom Cruise. And there he goes. And I learned about another movie Francis Ford Coppola is known for outside of The Godfather. I got to contemplate the lives of others who grew up in rougher environments, and maybe stuff like this really speaks to them, and I should be more considerate, since as I've grown older, I've come to know and meet people like that, and films like this give me insight into the lives of those people. Maybe what you learn from a film is what you try to learn from it. Try to use your head, and you will grow into a stronger and wiser man. That's all I have, audience. Have a good night.